there is a strange moment that happens quietly. No announcement, no warning. You notice it when people stop pausing. They nod before thinking. They agree before listening. They repeat phrases that don't sound like their own. No one forces them. No one threatens them. And yet, everyone moves in the same direction. At first, it looks harmless, polite, even normal. But something subtle is happening. You can feel it in conversations where silence becomes awkward, in rooms where hesitation feels dangerous, in spaces where not reacting fast enough draws attention. Not the good kind. No one says, "You must conform." You just learn what happens when you don't. You learn it by watching who gets ignored, who gets labeled difficult, who slowly disappears from the center of the room. The pressure isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It lives in glances, in timing, in the small discomfort that shows up when someone doesn't follow the rhythm. Standing still suddenly feels risky. Most people don't notice the moment they start adjusting. They don't remember deciding to align. They just remember wanting the tension to stop. So they laugh when everyone laughs. They agree when agreement is expected. They soften their edges before anyone asks. Not because they're weak, but because safety feels good. Belonging feels like relief. And relief is addictive. What's dangerous about conformity is not that it demands obedience. It doesn't. It offers comfort. It promises peace in exchange for alignment. It whispers that blending in is protection. You see it everywhere once you know where to look. In workplaces, where dissent is called negativity. In social spaces, where standing out is treated like instability. In online spaces where silence is mistaken for absence, the system doesn't have to punish you directly. It just makes discomfort visible. And most people respond the same way. They adjust. They lower their voice. They round their opinions. They remove the parts that don't fit. Is not because they've been convinced, but because they've been trained. Trained to associate difference with risk. Trained to feel that stillness attracts attention. Trained to believe that safety comes from staying in line. This is how conformity begins. Not with rules, not with commands, but with a quiet lesson learned over time. Standing apart feels unsafe. Standing still feels exposed. Standing out feels unnecessary. So people move together, quickly, without asking where they're going, and most never realize that the moment they stopped choosing was the moment obedience started to feel like safety. The human brain is not built for isolation. It never was. Long before rules, laws, or systems, survival depended on alignment. Belonging meant protection. Being excluded meant danger. That wiring never disappeared. It only adapted. Today, the threat is no longer physical, but the reaction is the same. The brain still scans for signals of acceptance, tone, timing, reaction speed. And when something feels off, it doesn't ask questions. It corrects behavior. This is why conformity doesn't thiefy said. It feels natural. Obedience rarely arrives as pressure. It arrives as relief. Relief from tension. Relief from standing out. Relief from being noticed in the wrong way. When everyone around you reacts quickly, staying still feels wrong. When everyone agrees, hesitation feels suspicious. When everyone moves, stopping feels unsafe. So the brain chooses the path of least resistance. Not because it's right, but because it's quiet. Conformity reduces friction, and friction feels like threat. What's unsettling is how little it takes. No authority needs to intervene. No rule needs to be stated. A raised eyebrow is enough. A pause is enough. A subtle shift in tone does the work. And over time people begin to anticipate discomfort before it happens. They filter thoughts before speaking. They sense which opinions will land smoothly. They abandon questions that might slow the room down, not consciously, automatically. This is how conformity scales, not through fear, but through prediction. The brain learns patterns, and it learns them fast. It notices which behaviors are rewarded with ease, which ones are met with silence, Which ones create awkward pauses? Soon, the decision isn't whether to conform. The decision disappears. Because the safest option becomes obvious: to blend, to mirror, to move with the group. What looks like agreement from the outside is often just avoidance on the inside. Avoidance of discomfort. Avoidance of friction. Avoidance of attention. And once avoidance becomes a habit, obedience stops feeling like submission. It feels like common sense. That's why conformity is so effective. It doesn't ask you to believe anything. It only asks you to stay aligned, to keep pace, to match tone, to react on time. And most people do. Not because they re-controlled, but because they've learned that peace comes from compliance. The dangerous part isn't that people obey, it's that they start to associate obedience with safety. And safety feels like the right choice, even when it slowly erases the space where independent thought used to live. Once conformity settles in, something subtle changes, not in behavior, in perception. People don't feel controlled. They feel comfortable, and that's the most effective form of power. Systems don't need to force alignment when individuals do it themselves. They don't need belief. They don't need loyalty. They only need predictability. When people adjust before being asked, friction disappears. When hesitation is removed, movement becomes smooth. When dissent is quieted internally, no correction is required. This is why conformity doesn't announce itself as obedience. It presents itself as maturity, as professionalism, as being reasonable. And anyone who doesn't adapt quickly enough starts to feel out of place. Not rejected, just misaligned. That feeling is powerful, because humans don't fear being wrong as much as they fear being isolated. So, choices shrink, not because options disappear, but because selecting them feels unnecessary. Why speak when silence keeps the peace? Why pause when momentum rewards speed? Why stand still when movement avoids attention? Over time, the space between thought and action collapses. Reaction replaces reflection. Agreement replaces observation. And what looks like harmony is often just synchronized avoidance. The cost of this isn't immediate. It's gradual. Ideas remain unspoken. Questions are abandoned early. Differences dissolve before they can be examined, not because they were disproven, but because they felt inconvenient. This is how systems remain stable without visible force. They don't suppress alternatives. They make them uncomfortable, and most people respond the same way. They retreat inward. They soften edges. They comply quietly. Until compliance no longer feels like a decision, it feels like the default. The system doesn't need your belief. It doesn't even need your agreement. It only needs your silence. And silence is easy to maintain when obedience feels like safety. Before you leave, take a second to check if you're resubscribed. Most people think they are. They usually aren't.